The motion before the House reads, this House prefers a world where adult children take in their elderly parents rather than support them to live separately. Speeches will last for 8 minutes. I will clap once at 1 minute and once at 7 minutes, between which time speakers can offer points of information, and I'll clap twice at 8 minutes. Reply speeches are 4 minutes long. I will clap once at 3 minutes and once at twice at 4 minutes. I ask that all mobile phones be turned off and welcome the first proposition speaker to speak the motion. Hear, hear.
Around the world today, elderly people are facing an epidemic of loneliness. We're in countries as wide-ranging as the United Kingdom and the United States are facing suicide rates through the roof of elderly people who are struggling to find a reason to live because they feel abandoned by their families. That is a world that we don't think we should ever be proud to support, and that's why we're proud to support a world in which elderly people live with their families in a communal environment. What does the world that we prefer look like on our side of the house? Once elderly parents have retired and decide that they want support, instead of moving to a retirement village or private residential place paid for by their children, those adult children take them into their own home. This means that multiple generations are going to be living under one roof. The elderly parents, the adult children, and any grandchildren or great-grandchildren that they may have. Sometimes the elderly parents would live in an annex or a granny flat, sometimes they would not and live in the same area. But because these grandparents are no longer working, importantly they're at home when the kids get home. They can help cooking dinner and they can contribute to family life in a way that wouldn't be done alternatively. This kind of culture we would say is foreign generally to the West, but is dominant in many Asian and Pacific Island cultures and has worked extremely well in those areas. Our burden in today's debate is a duty to care for these people, but also that we improve the lives of elderly people, or that this kind of family life helps everyone better off on our side of the house. 4 arguments to do that. Firstly, I'll talk about that duty. Secondly, I'll talk about how we benefit the elderly. Thirdly, about family life as a whole, and then Mitch will bring you a split about how we get a society that values respect more generally. Firstly, let's talk about the duty to reciprocate the guardianship of your elderly parents. The premise of today's debate is that adult children owe a duty of care to their parents. This duty is rooted in reciprocation for the provision that parent made for their child in childhood. We tell you that that duty extends more than simply providing money or the necessities of life, because parents provided their children with more than that in childhood. Importantly, they provided them with companionship and emotional support with a level of closeness that you can only ever get with family. Therefore, in the most vulnerable stage of the parent's life, we think the children have a duty to reciprocate that care. Opposition cannot satisfy this principal burden in today's debate without welcoming the parent into the home or finding another way to achieve that same deep level of meaningful emotional support that goes more than the social life or the friends that you have. Second point then, how our world leads to a more fulfilling life for elderly parents. I tell you again about the loneliness epidemic that we are facing. With all these elderly parents know that they are going to die, that they're on a gradual march to their own demise. And often their partner and their friends have passed away or are not the same as they used to be, and they no longer find meaning in the connections that they once had. They also often have a deep frustration in losing their physical ability or their mental agility. We would say these are people who need deep emotional connection. Opposition has 2 options. They can support them living in rest homes with other elderly people or living by themselves in homes that are paid for by their children. But we would say these are both worse than our world. Let's talk about how we help these elderly people. 4 key reasons. Firstly, they see their family every single day. That is immensely important when you can talk and you can chat to them and you can have dinner with them every night and just talk about how their day was in a way that's with people you love. But this never happens crucially in a rest home. We would say you never get that same opportunity to connect with that same family. Why? Well, it's out of sight, right? You don't have to think or visit as much as you should if that elderly person that you do have a connection with is in a rest home. But more than that, we'd say people are incredibly busy. It's often really hard to take time out of your schedule where you're like struggling to work 2 jobs to go and see your elderly parent. That means that maybe you get to see your parent once a month in a rest home or once a fortnight, but we don't think that's going to be anywhere near as comparable as the level of emotional support you get on the daily. In our world, it's distinct from talking to other old people, because these are people that you love and have known for decades, but they're also not suffering from the same demise that I talked about earlier. The vitality of being able to talk to your grandchildren and see the joy on their faces every day is something that cannot be underestimated in today's debate. Secondly, they value you not because of your professional or social self, but based on who you are. Because you no longer feel useless when you're with a family who respects you for who you are, not what you do or what socially you can contribute to the situation. Thirdly, we talk about social networks. Because in a world where living with your family is the norm, we would say that elderly can connect with each other and maintain independence if they wish. Like going to the bridge club, even though you live with your family at home. If everyone else is living at home, everyone else probably still wants that level of connection, you're still going to get that. Finally, we talk about security and safety in 2 ways. Firstly, we just say you're going to be more secure and there's going to be less chance of elder abuse in a home with a family that actually respects you. You also have more trust. Like, who do you trust more as an elderly person? A random staff member you vaguely remember the face of an elderly at home, or someone that you've known for your entire life? Secondly, in a minute, we talk about the proximity of care. Because the risk of a staff to an elderly, the ratio of staff to elderly is poor in rest homes. In our world, you have a whole family looking after 1 or 2 people. So if they have a fall, they're more likely to be able to be found, they're more likely to be able to be ready to share, and more likely to be able to be given specific care. Yes?
Parental-child relationships are oftentimes complicated and tense. Your burden is to justify close, constant proximity in this debate.
We think the overwhelming benefits of having someone who is close to you and can support you in times of need are never met on that side of the house, even if that relationship is somewhat fraught. Because the benefits of just being there to someone that you love is something that can never achieve. At the end of this point, an emotionally fulfilling, safe and comfortable retirement is the best way to help the elderly, and those benefits are independent of how wealthy they are. Because even if these homes aren't the most affluent or aren't the most supportive, the comparative that those people don't have the money or willingness to afford a nice rest home anyway. Third point then, how we get better intergenerational family life. For the adult children in today's debate, it's a massive struggle to juggle parenting and modern adulting on your own. Why is this? Well, because in modern society, often both parents are expected to work and care for children. Because there's a very high cost of living for people living in urban areas, and because there's huge expectation for parents today who are supposed to attend parent-teacher meetings, attend co-curricular activities, and be the taxi driver for their children. This is especially true in the opposition's world, where they have to pay off their own mortgage and provide for retirement of their elderly parents. When elderly people live with their adult children, they help out around the house. What does this look like? It looks like babysitting your kids if your parents have to make work overtime. It looks like cooking dinner or picking kids up for school or extracurriculars. Note that this is done willingly because they love to feed their grandparents. They want to feel useful. They still have a sense of parental obligation, and they don't want to, importantly, you don't have to be at your peak to do these things. This means they actually help out around the house. You may, as a child, have to buy more groceries to support them, but that pays itself off when they can cook those groceries and you don't have to pay their retirement fund. But even if they couldn't do any of that, an elderly parent can still be a good source of emotional support. When you have intergenerational storytelling, when you can fascinate the younger generation with tales of your time and of your culture. You can comfort your kids and your grandkids in times of trouble. You can do that because you're not directly related to those problems. You can step outside of their world. At the end of today's debate, we're the side where every member of a family benefits, particularly the most vulnerable elderly people who are being let down in Western models where they're being shipped off to a retirement home and left alone to fend for themselves. Proud to propose.
I thank that speaker for their speech and welcome to sit down the first opposition speaker.
proposition gave you a few things that parents do rightfully deserve. First, they tell you about how parents do deserve a sense of companionship, that they don't deserve to be in a sense of emotional loneliness constantly. But they missed one of the most crucial parts of their arguments. Why are these things intrinsic to living in a home with your adult children? We would tell you on our side of the house. These things can also equally be accessed by simply spending more time with your parents and also doing things like being financially stable enough so that you can afford to help your parents for them to meet their own ends. Prop needed to do more about why 100% of the time living in proximity was the thing that was necessary in this debate. Prop's opposition is already ahead. A few things in this speech. First, I'm going to be going over a quick note on framing before addressing proposition's material and then presenting our first two substantive arguments. But first, a quick note on framing. Proposition tells you that their burden in this debate is only to show you that children have a duty to care and help their parents. We don't think that this is intrinsically true. We think they have to do a little bit more, because we also agree that a duty to care does probably exist to a certain extent on our side of the house. However, proposition must prove why any obligation between parent and children must necessarily mean that they have to live with you and can't be addressed with any other action. That is the only world in which we would prefer 100% of the time that children live with their parents. Another thing I'd just like to note on framing is a characterization of elderly parents. We think that this exists on a broad spectrum, right? So either A, an individual literally cannot live on their own because of things like constraining health issues, so they need to constantly be looked after. Note that this means that a lot of their material about being able to help with the family doesn't materialize. But second, it could look things like elderly parents who are self-sustainable. We think in that instance, they can also just live by themselves. They don't have to go to things like an elderly home. With that being said, let's look at some of the material that proposition gives you in the one. First of all, they tell you that adult children have this duty to house people in their homes. I'm going to be engaging with this way more substantially in my material, but note that the closest thing you get to unique reasons as to why parents have to live with their adult children is for emotional stability and emotional secureness. We would tell you, in the instances that these relationships are complex, intense, oftentimes to rebuild those broken mends, what you have to do is have breaks from one another so that you can slowly, over time, rebuild those relationships. In response to their second substantive argument, they basically give you this argument as to why elderly people are going to be happier whenever they live in these homes. They give you this idea that in the status quo, people in elderly homes are just out of sight, out of mind. We have a problem with this characterization. Whenever you live in a retirement home, it's not like you can't be visited or you can't leave. Note that this also engages with the material about independence and being able to do things like go to bridge club. We think in that instance, it's more likely to happen on our side of the house because they do live independently or in homes. The second thing that I'd just like to note is whenever they tell you about the idea that elderly homes are sometimes really problematic, here's the thing. We think that some of these instances are problematic, but let's characterize the actual scenario. Children who put their parents in elderly care homes are likely to believe A, they can't take care of their parents themselves, B, they don't want physical proximity to their parents, or C, their parents need constant attention because of medical, physical, or mental reasons. This makes it better for parents to live in these homes, and we think in the vast majority of instances, they're able to get the attention that they require. But it also crucially means that it is worse for the kids who believe those things to take parents in, because it will result in those parents being treated badly in homes with their own children if they don't want to be in physical proximity, if they feel resentment, or in the instances where they simply cannot take care of their parents, we think the harms are far worse on their side of the house. Note on the second substantive argument about having better intergenerational units, we would tell you, first of all, if you are capable of helping around the house, you can probably live by yourself and still do these things like pick up the kids from school and things of that nature. Second of all, we would tell you that not every parent is capable of doing this if they live in the instances where they need constant medical attention. And third, we would tell you that it's probably not okay to just say that I want you to live here because I want you to cook for me. Even in the instances where we don't think that you should take a purely utilitarian approach, oftentimes this conflicts with the interests of the elderly parents themselves, but I'll talk about that more in substantive. Our first substantive argument is about how there is no moral burden to sharing a home with your elderly parents. 3 ways in which this happens. First, there is often internal tension. This clashes directly with the first substantive we heard from side proposition. Even in loving parent-child relationships, there are several things that complicate this. First, through childhood varied tensions that exist, Events like divorce or strong personality differences mean that oftentimes there are tense relations between parents and child. That means that they could snap at you, and those dinners that they talk about are likely to be extremely tense. Proposition 1 implicitly concedes this. The second thing that could complicate these relationships is identity. There could be differences in religious, political, or social views, especially if it relates to how you as a child view yourself. Things like being a gay child in a very conservative family, or marrying someone of a different race whenever your parents that are elderly do not accept that, vastly complicate this relationship.
What information?
So the second thing that we would tell you, the third thing that we would tell you for these tensions is that it's extremely straining sometimes because of things like emotional abuse. We recognize that this is the extreme, that they probably don't have to defend abusive parents being housed in their homes, but note that oftentimes emotional abuse is subtle, it is toxic and manipulative in ways that cannot be easily identified. We think that this applies to the vast majority of parent-child relationships, because whenever you spend 30 plus years with someone, do we think that that relationship necessarily has a very tense history that needs to be addressed? When these relationships are complicated, it needs to be mended in short, controlled spaces. The second way that this happens is that it conflicts with the child's ability and obligation to take care of their children and their own families. Adult children oftentimes have to start families. For instance, grandparents interacting, especially when they have different views, and the adult child parent isn't in the room, we think this can do things that is important. Whenever we tell you how important the parent-child relationship is, know that it also extends to the adult child who now has their own children. The third independent reason as to why this doesn't actually happen whenever the burden doesn't exist is that at proposition's highest ground, the burden for physical proximity does not exist. Why? The reason that parents have an obligation to take their children in is because in the vast majority of instances, they chose to have children and to raise them. This is not true in the same way of children who cannot choose to take on the burden of physically caring or physically being in the same proximity as their parents. I'm now going to move on to the second substantial argument. Before that, go ahead.
Do you think it's realistic that a large proportion of parents actually have relationships with their children as bad as most characterize?
I'm not characterizing to you that every single parent-child relationship is horrible, rather that the vast majority of relationships that last over 30 plus years are tense. Sometimes they do have history. In that instance, even if for the most case scenarios, these relationships are good, we think there is going to be strain that results in internal conflict inside the house. Our second substantive argument is on how the majority of adult parents are harmed. 3 ways this happens. First, through medical expertise. Old age often brings unforeseen problems. Note that living in the house means that your adult children may not be able to adequately care for you. Second, communities. Oftentimes, the wants or goals of the elderly conflict with the future goals of the children. For example, if I want to live in a retirement community with my friends instead of sitting at home all day, we think that's something they should be able to do. Or if I'm an immigrant and I want to stay in my home country, but my entire family of my children are leaving, we think they might want to stay. The third reason that happens is the idea of constant attention, that sometimes elderly parents are in a situation where they need the constant attention that can only be provided to them in places like elderly homes, and that this burden will be unduly shared. At the end of the day, proposition needs to prove to you why physical proximity 100% of the time is necessary. They haven't. Opposition has taken this debate.
I thank that speaker for their speech and welcome the second proposition speaker to continue their team's case.
Opposition provided absolutely no alternative for solving the significant problems of loneliness and incredible mental strain that are put on old people in this debate. They provided no way in which those people could possibly improve their situation. Ours was the side of the House that recognised that the most vulnerable stakeholder in this debate are the parents who are being left behind in situations where they are forgotten by their families. And we were the side of the house that said that was not acceptable, that we must stand up for them, and that they must be provided an opportunity to enjoy their twilight years. Proud to propose. I'm going to do three things in this speech. Firstly, talk about the issue of support to parents. Secondly, talk about the effect on families. And thirdly, talk about the effect, talk about my substantive material about why our policy uniquely improves societal attitudes towards the elderly. Let's talk about this first issue of supporting parents, because we heard two principal contentions with this. Firstly, that it was not exclusive to our side of the house, and secondly, that occasionally these were complex relationships. Let's talk about exclusivity, because they told us that we never proved why none of our outcomes couldn't happen in a world of rest homes or independent living. But that was to entirely ignore the mechanistic reasons we told you at first about why rest home visits can never truly match the deep level of emotional interconnectivity that you get on our side of the house. Because living under the same roof, eating dinner every single night together, and simply being visited more than once every month are going to lead to a much greater level of emotional stability. We tell you they didn't deal with that at all. Let's talk then about the question of complex relationships. Because we tell you, firstly, that in the majority of cases, it's simply not true. Even if you didn't get on with your parents as you were a teenager, it's likely that as you've grown to have children yourself, you understand their perspective. So it's likely a lot of those issues, firstly, disappear as the children's perspectives change, and secondly, disappear as time makes them simply less relevant. And we tell you that broadly, parents love their children and children love their parents, that is a reality that side of the house has to deal with. Also, in the most terrible cases, in the cases, for instance, of the homophobic father and the gay son, that is a terrible complex that we don't think results in support of the parent on either side of the house, because this debate is about the cases where the parents are supported by their children. And in those cases, we tell you the only parents who would be supported by their children are those who are not abusive, who do not question the fundamental identity of their children. But also, we tell you that our side of the house uniquely solves those complex relationships because at the point they fester, when you don't have the ability to discuss the issues, at the point where they fester, where the parent stays far away on the other side of town in a rest home, you don't have the ability to deal with those issues. So that means that both the parent and the child are left for the remainder of their lives having not dealt with those complex issues, with those complex relationships. We're not proud to support that. On the secondary issue then, within the support to parents of medical care, we told you that clearly this debate excludes people who are literally in need of hospitalisation, so we don't think that particularly applies. But they didn't engage with our structural analysis about why the care is likely to be better in our world, because yes, even if in rest homes there are trained nurses, there is one for every 50 patients at that rest home. In our world, we tell you that the individualised attention that you can give to one or two parents that you have at your house is much greater than that can be given to them when there are a significant other number of really high-need parents who have no ability to receive that attention in a rest home. And this throwaway line on the principle that we heard from proposition with regards to this, that actually, no, you didn't owe a duty of care to your parents because they knowingly took on the right, they knowingly took on the duty, and they knowingly took on the duty to look after you, you did not knowingly take on the duty to look after them. Just doesn't stand at the point at which they are willing to support for the parents in rest homes. We tell you the debate is premised on that duty existing. We don't think that throwaway line is at all helpful. Before I move on to the effect on the wider families, I'll take the line.
Sure, let's characterize tense relationships not on either extreme end, but in the middle, where there is some work to be done. Opposition tells you in a lot of these instances, Physical space is needed, and when you force physical proximity, you get even more tense relationships and abusive parents.
We don't think that's at all true, because at the point where the parent feels abandoned by their children, that is where they feel more tense towards their children. At the point where the children have no opportunity to deal with the parent, that is where they don't understand their perspective, and that's where the emotions become higher and become more tense. We don't think that characterization works in this debate. Now let's talk about the effect on the families themselves, because what we heard here was that rest homes were only chosen at the point at which it was better for the family for the rest homes to be chosen. We tell you that's not true in this debate. That is why rest home adoption rates are significantly different across the world, because the choice to take a rest home is based on the societal norm, not based on the specific relations of the parents. At the point where we say it's totally normal for parents to be taken in by their adult children, that is where more rest homes are, fewer parents end up in rest homes, because those families are willing to engage with the likelihood that their parents will be good with them at home. And the material about how, but they're just likely to be a strain and divert resources away from the younger children, just doesn't stand in this debate, because we tell you the overwhelming majority of these parents, even if they provide some level of strain because you have to take them to the doctors, are still able to be at home cooking, or be at home being there when you come home to provide you with emotional support. We tell you that does not exist in this debate. At this point in the debate rather, we tell you it is significantly better for the parents, better for the parent-child relationship, and significantly better for the families to prefer a world in which the parent can contribute to the family than where they are simply required to pay for them. Now let's talk about the societal attitude towards the elderly, because let's be clear, opposition's world isolates the elderly. When grandma is a person you visit once every month, you naturally form a less deep emotional bond with her. You're naturally less attached to her, because you don't talk to her anywhere near as much. You don't live with her every single day of the week. When she is the one who might cook you dinner once or twice a week, when she is the one who you sit down with when you come home from school, or when you come home from a hard day at work, you become much more emotionally attached to her. That emotional attachment, we tell you, is valuable not merely to the child and to the parent, but to the broader society. Because we tell you at the point where you establish those broader emotional attachments to old people, that transfers into caring more about old people as a class, because if you like your grandmother, you can assume that other people like their grandmothers. And in our world, we tell you that significantly improves how people think about the elderly. So what does that mean on the ground? That means you're more likely to support things like increased payments for superannuation. That means you're more likely to support things like safeguards for elder abuse. At the end of this debate, we tell you that living with your adult children improves parents, improves children, improves the relationship, and improves the relations for society and the elderly broadly. Proud to propose.
I thank that speaker for their speech and welcome the second opposition speaker.
Proposition 2 says that we give you no alternatives. I think Un made it very clear. Older or elderly people can still live away from the home, but that doesn't mean they can't pick up the kids from school. That doesn't mean they can't still cook dinner. The question that Proposition has yet to prove is to why that it is necessary that they live in the home. It is not enough that after 16 minutes of proposition analysis, they just prove marginal utilitarian benefits. In this debate, they've shown that in the overwhelming number of cases, the burden left onto children from the guardianship presented by their parents uniquely causes the fact that children have to take them into their own home. We still don't think there was enough analysis on this point. In my speech, 2 questions. First, is there a duty, and is this duty supererogatory? Before secondly, questioning the fact, is this good for the family structure and these people? First question, is there a duty? What does proposition give you? They say there's a duty to reciprocate guardianship, and this extends to more than just money. It looks like companionship and guardianship. We have 3 responses. First, the duty they present is supererogatory. This is to say that even if the burden exists for children to give back to their parents, we say that specifically bringing them into your own home is past the duty that children necessarily need to meet. Why is this true? It's not just a throwaway line that Un gives you, it's the crux of our case. When we tell you that children do not choose to be born into their family structures, meaning they don't have the same necessary burden to meet the exact same reciprocal response that their parents gave them. Our second response is, let's talk more specifically about their language and justifications. They say things like companionship and guardianship. We think these things are achieved by retirement homes. First, on guardianship. Un says that in many cases these people actually achieve better health care. And no, we weren't talking about hospitalization. We were talking about in the event that an elderly, frail person might fall in the home, or making sure that they take their pills on time, or helping them to bathe if they're frail. Yes, this isn't about hospitalization, but we made very clear this is about the wide variety of things on the spectrum that Un gave you. But then on companionship, Un actually told you it's far better to have friendships of people around you who are like you, who are experiencing the same things that you are experiencing. Like if you're at dinner and talking to other elderly people after you just had lunch with your family who came to visit you, we think that's preferable than the one dinner at night when people come home tired from the 2 to 3 jobs that they just characterized on their side of the house. Note, we also just don't think just eating dinner isn't significantly different than what we bring to you on our side of the house. Our third response is that if children are put in these parents are put in abusive, problematic homes, we think these are the same children putting them there that can't afford to take care of them at their own house, or who don't have a good enough relationship for the relationship at home to be beneficial. Their best case scenario feeds into our best argumentation. How then did they respond to Un's principled analysis? They said, oh, most of these relationships aren't that bad. Sure, even if the relationship is amicable from afar, at the point at which you're putting them in close, constant proximity, we think that's how bad relationships bubble over. Moreover, they said, it's likely the parent is going to respect the new lifestyle. First, we would tell you things change over time when you go to college, get a job, go into the real world, meaning parents might not know what that new lifestyle is. And secondly, no proposition 2, you cannot frame out of this debate bad relationships. Why? Because I might have massive religious difference from my mother, but I still want her to live a good life in a home. I just don't think it's beneficial for her to be telling my children religious differences that I have in my home. We have a few questions for proposition then. What if the parent hates your loved one because they're a Catholic? What if the parenting styles are different? What if the parent has moral qualms with how you live your lifestyle? We think people have a right to run their home in a way they want supersedes the supererogatory duty of bringing the parent into your own home. The second question then becomes, is this better for the parent's material life? We have 5 responses. First, the same lack of physical and mental ability is why parents are going to internalize the fact that they are a burden. Because if they can't help take care of the child, if they can't help wash the dishes, every single time they see that pain in their child's eyes, they internalize their burden. Secondly, if an adult child is unwilling to take the inconvenience to see their parent at dinner every night in their own home, we think it's unlikely they have a good relationship. Thirdly, if it's true that you're working 2 or 3 jobs, we think you're also lonely when you're now living by yourself in your home every single day. We think you can still feel abandoned in your own child's home. Fourthly, we think this argument is non-unique. If you're capable of living by yourself, you can still pick up the kids from school or cook dinner. Thus, this debate lies elsewhere when people are unable to take care of themselves. And fifthly, their worst case scenario is the relationship starts amicable, but because of the constant proximity, that relationship then becomes bad. Meaning their best case scenario, meaning in their worst case scenario, in your twilight years, you find out that you and your child had such massive differences that you end on bad terms. I'll take that point.
Even if they didn't choose to be born, if they didn't choose to be born, why do children have any duty to support parents at all?
We would say your side of the house, if the duty is true that they gained money or guardianship and that you think they need to respond with money and guardianship, we think it's perfectly fine to do so by giving them a stipend to live in their own house or giving them a stipend to live in a medical home. We still don't think that you've proved on your side of the house as to why they have to take them into their own home. Our third substantive argument is that the burden of taking in a parent into the home is likely to fall onto women. Let's analyze what the broad social dynamics of the home are in many cultures. Women are likely to be deemed as the nurturer or have the healing homemaker role. That is why childcare often falls on women. They're frequently told to hold off on their own ambitions to fill the societal role. Note the social trend that encourages women to adopt selflessness and taking care of the home above all else. This is enshrined in things like religious doctrine. For example, in Islam, women are supposed to be dominant in the domestic sphere. In Christianity, women are supposed to be familial, so they tend to assume that role. This is why, as time has progressed, women become responsible for domestic roles, meaning this will create two scenarios. One, women stop working or work less. We think for the same reason that so many women stop working after they have a child means they will stop working if they need to take care of their parents. It's not good enough for a proposition to say they have an in-home nurse when that expense is often too costly for many people. Now, more women are disadvantaged in the workforce because although not every woman has a child, most adult women do have parents. Note, this makes them more disadvantaged in the workforce. Regrettably, part of the reason that employers don't hire women is because they think they're going to take time off for childcare. But now they double the incentive for the employer to do so because they think they're going to take time off for the child and for their parents. Imagine if the current burden on women was now doubled. The reason that women can't get promotions in the status quo is because their bosses oftentimes assume they would never be willing to take that promotion because it would take too much time away from the home. That narrative becomes more entrenched in society at the point in which they place more burden on women. This is important strategically for the round, because even if proposition proves that there's a duty to take into the home, which they haven't yet done, it does not then prove why it is principally fair to place that burden specifically on one stakeholder in society. We think at this point we are very far ahead. Vote for the proposition.
I thank that speaker for their speech and welcome the third proposition speaker.
Sorry, we're just waiting for New Zealand.
Okay.
So it goes.
Feel good? Alright, cool. I'd just like to start by congratulating both sides on what was a really good, enjoyable debate, and congratulations on getting this far. So well done. I'm just going to break this up into three parts. So the first, I'm just going to give some general feedback. The second, I'm going to say the result, and then the third is how the panel came to that result. So just in feedback, a couple of things. The first was that this is a debate about two existing norms. You're not forcing people to do anything, you're just changing the expectations around them. It's important that people don't claim things in absolutes and use broad brushstrokes to characterize certain groups of people that we're talking about. The second was in terms of burden pushing. Please try not to do it explicitly. The burden of the debate for the proposition is to prove the debate and to prove the motion. Similarly, on op it is to disprove the motion. You can frame debates implicitly, but do not claim that sides have burdens without actually giving reasons as to why that is the case. And the third was make sure that you prove your claims to sufficiency and use mechanisms and reasons as to why that is likely to happen to be the case. I think both sides use really good style and rhetoric to explain harms and to explain problems. Going further and explaining those mechanisms is a really good way to elucidate the claims that you make and in order to prove those mechanisms. So, in terms of the decision, the panel was unanimous in awarding this debate to side opposition to USA, so congratulations. So there were three kind of clear questions in this debate. The first is, what is the moral duty of these working people have towards their parents? The second was, how does this affect the elderly and the family unit? And the third was, how does this affect norms and expectations regarding care? So on the moral duty question, what we hear from proposition was the fact that this duty was one of reciprocation, that the elderly had helped their children and that therefore it required, in reciprocation, a burden that was more than just monetary. It was one in which you invited these people into their houses. We hear from opposition the fact that this is a high bar, that to invite and bring people into your own home at every stage is one that is an incredibly high bar, and this does not meet that bar. They give reasons, which is to say you did not choose to be born and therefore were not able and did not therefore have the obligation to have your agency taken away from you in bringing those people into your home. I think proposition correctly point out that if that is true, why is there any burden at all? And whilst it was implicit from opposition in saying and elucidated clearest at third when they say it was the extent to which that existed, I think that it was not proved as to why specifically on either side of the house the norm that they were standing for was one that was actually brought out as being the duty, particularly at the point in which both of these norms existed, and in another part of the world, in the same way as saying that bringing someone into your home is a huge bar, they would probably say that kicking someone out of your home and asking them to leave and putting them in a rest home is a similarly huge bar. So at the end of that, it was largely, in terms of the principle, a wash, and we just weighed this up on the second two claims, the first of which was how does this affect the elderly and the family. So what we hear from proposition is really good characterization, that there's a huge problem that exists right now with elder neglect and with loneliness, that these people are living really lonely lives, that they are often neglected in the care homes that they go into. They give two reasons as to why this improves at the point in which you bring these people into your houses. The first was that you see these people every day and you can contribute to that life and you no longer feel as if your life has no purpose and that you are not a burden because you are doing things like cooking dinner every night, you are doing things like bringing your kids home, your grandkids home from school to alleviate the burden that exists on your parents. The second thing that they claim was that you get security and safety, which is unlike that you get in a rest home, where there were things like elder abuse, where there were a lot of problems associated with that. We hear a couple of claims from opposition in contention to that. The first was that in a world in which they lived in rest homes or they lived independently, they can obviously still see those kids, they can obviously still contribute in the same kind of way. They can still go out of their way to pick their kids up from school, they can still come over to cook dinner for their kids, for their grandkids. The second was that the tensions that exist at the point that you have people in those homes often pushed families apart, because the close proximity meant that you saw them every day, which meant that any differences, whether they be ideological or whether they be any other plethora of reasons, were likely to be exacerbated at the point that you saw them every single day. I think this was where the debate got caught most up into one where it was a messy debate about different competing characterizations, about whether or not the elderly were likely to be able to fend for themselves, whether they were likely to be independent, whether or not the relationships were one that was inherently problematic, whether they were abusive relationships or the like. At their most clearest though, we hear from proposition that it was an extent to which you could contribute to the family life, that you could be more helpful at the point that you live every day in that house, you could cook more dinners, that you could be more of a help to the family unit as a whole. The second was that time and proximity was something that heals wounds, and at the point that you saw them every day, you were likely to heal those wounds, and that when you pushed these people away, that was what exacerbated the differences because you never saw them, and it resulted in a situation in which you did not care about the elderly. From opposition, they make three claims to ultimately win them this point. The first was that they can still be lonely in their own home. When you don't see them every day, when their kids are coming home from work and their grandkids are at school every day, they can still feel lonely, particularly at the point that the problems and tensions were exacerbated. They also claim that the care would likely be worse, and this was made most clear when they say that it was even in the case where there was only one professional to every 50 people in a rest home, at least they were professionals, not people that did not understand actually how to take care of these people. But then the third was that you can still care about your grandparents or the elderly when you do not see them. We all love our grandparents even if they have really problematic views on things like religion. So at the end of that, we were not convinced about proposition's harm, and we were convinced that it's to some extent the tensions that exist within families may put a huge strain on those family relationships and may make it more problematic, particularly the point that you did not necessarily have those harms that came up from proposition solved. So on the third, about how this affects norms and expectations regarding care, we hear really good analysis from second opposition, which is to suggest that the burden of this is by and large going to fall on women. Is in a patriarchal society which demands that domestic things be mainly done by women within that family unit, by and large that obligation and that burden would fall on the women, and there would be a plethora of harms associated with that. From proposition, they contend that this is based on proving that they would be a net harm, that they would be a net burden within the family unit. But we think that in the vast majority of cases, opposition proved that it would be to some extent a burden, that they would have to do some things to care for these individuals. Note that often it would the alternative was putting people in a rest home, so there must be some kind of care. So to some extent that would fall on the woman, which would be a harm within the society. The only other contention we hear was that this would change perceptions about how the elderly felt, but we felt that this was by and large unsubstantiated. So, because eventually we heard that by and large this would make the family unit worse, that the elderly would be worse cared for, and that this would put the burden of caring on the elderly by and large on women, we awarded this debate to opposition. So congratulations.
To look at the duties both teams thought they had in this debate. Because what we told you is that you should reciprocate the guardianship your parents gave to you and look after them in the time of their life where they are most vulnerable. What Team USA has been arguing was that you didn't choose to be born like your parents chose to have children, so therefore you shouldn't care for them at all. We think that Team USA seems to hate their grandparents, because actually on our side, we are committed to looking out for the people who cared for you when you were a child, looking out for them, especially when it means that they still provide for you, even though you're now a grown-up adult. We support a world in which families remain closer, and we think that benefits everyone. In my speech, I'll look at 3 points of clash. Firstly, on how we affect elderly parents, secondly, about family life, and thirdly, about the second opposition split about women. So, firstly, on elderly parents. I think I'll clarify what we think we need to do to win this point and this debate. Because this motion is about preferring a world. So we think that means we prefer a world where it benefits the vast majority of people. Actually, lots of the examples Team USA wanted to point out shouldn't be the core of the debate, because they gave us 3 specific ones, and we think these are in the vast minority of cases. The first instance was that people who literally can't afford to pay for their parents to live with them. If these people can't afford that, which we think is far cheaper than paying for retirement village fees, they don't fall under this debate at all, because this debate sets up caring for them at home as opposed to financially supporting them living elsewhere. But the second group Team USA mentioned was that people who literally just don't want to look after their parents. We think in really bad instances of emotional abuse, you're probably not going to support them on either side of the house, but we're willing to engage with people who have personality conflicts or minor disagreements in philosophy. The third instance they talked about was about people who need medical attention. If these people literally need to be hospitalized, we don't think they should be living in their homes at that moment. We think they should be taken to a unit for intensive care. But we think if people are just generally high risk because they're elderly, we're willing to debate on those grounds as well. That said, what did we think is uniquely great about living in a home with your adult children? Firstly, the constant proximity to your family. The issue that Team USA raised was that this wasn't mutually exclusive. But both sides agreed that in this world, parents, or adult children, were incredibly overworked, that they often were both expected to go to work if they were a male and a female, and that They would have to pay for several mortgages in their side of the house, which compounded this issue. That said, we don't think it was not mutually exclusive. If these parents, adult children, wouldn't be able to drive and, spend time with these grandparents every single day. We think that actually takes a huge chunk out of their time, especially if they can only do it on weekends, because that's when they get off work and their kids don't have to be picked up from school. So yes, this is absolutely mutually exclusive. But another thing the opposition said was that, sometimes this doesn't matter because people are really tired and grumpy when they come home from work. I think that ignores the reality of what kind of family connections we're talking about, because what we see on our side of the house is grandparents who cook dinner, and then the kids come home, their grandkids come home, and they all sit down and they get to enjoy hearing about their really little grandchild's day at school. They get to enjoy hearing little tidbits from what happened at work from their adult child. We thought there was something unique to our side, which hugely benefits these people, given we live in a world with an epidemic of loneliness. What they also said, however, on 10 Years Say, which is a lot of their case, was that sometimes you hate your family and it's worse if living together. Firstly, they didn't actually tell us why living together in close proximity actually makes this hatred and disagreement worse. They just said that it comes to a head more often. That said, we think Mitch gave you lots of analysis about how you actually break down those barriers, how you understand their perspective, and time heals lots of wounds. And I'll expand on this here by saying that, honestly, if you live together every day, you start to change your perspective, especially when these are about people you love. It's easier to change your mind on issues like Catholicism or homosexuality if your grandkids are the ones telling you that they went to school and they learned about religion. If your grandkids are the ones coming home telling you about how at school they learned in PE class about different kinds of sexualities. We think that when these grandparents are in contact with their grandchildren, and even with their adult children on a day-to-day basis, they're more likely to change their minds, especially given that they feel a debt of gratitude for being put up in their adult child's home. A second benefit that we thought was unique to this physical proximity was that these people, the people that you live with when you live in your family home, value you for the things you do that aren't necessarily based on your physical ability or your mental agility. They value you for talking to them and giving them stories about your life. They value you for cooking dinner. We heard no response from 10 Years Say. Third benefit about social networks. They said this happens more in restaurants. But actually, restaurants are quite lonely places because you might talk with people who you recently met when you go out for lunch in the communal dining hall. But at the end of every day, you go back to sit in your little apartment where a nurse comes and knocks on the door and checks on you to check you haven't passed away in your sleep. And you live an incredibly isolated life that feels incredibly depressing because of the nature of rest homes, because you have no vitality coming in to that place. But the fourth unique benefit was that you feel more secure and safe. 10 Years Say said you need medical attention. We told you that the greater proximity and the greater amount of people looking after you if you're at home, the fact that you have 5 people looking after you instead of 1 person trying to look after 50 elderly people means you are more likely to be found in the case of an accident if you fall down the stairs. But even if they were talking about help bathing, we think you feel far more safe if it's your family doing it, people who you have also seen in those vulnerable positions, and not some stranger who has to sponge you down on a night-to-night basis. We think they put people in a really lonely, isolated place that makes it difficult to feel comfortable even when you're getting medical care. Also, we thought there was less elder abuse because your family understand and care about your issues and they're not jaded because of the reality of being elderly. We think, clearly, we provide a better life for elderly people and that's where we're going to win that point. But second point in today's debate about family life. We told you that modern life is difficult, but when you have grandparents willing to come and help out in your house, that significantly reduces the burden on everyone. Their main contention was that if you're old, you're automatically not able to do anything because you're physically, losing your abilities. I reject this because there are 90-year-old grandmas in Italy and Sicily cooking dinner for their kids every single night. Why is that? It's because it takes far less physical activity to prepare a meal over 2 or 3 hours than to go to work and build things or go to work and sit in a cubicle all day. We think the kinds of home labour are actually possible for people once they reach an older age. But they kept saying, oh, you can pick up your kids if you live somewhere else. You can help out even if you live an hour away. That's unrealistic because who is going to drive in traffic every single night to go and cook dinner at somebody else's home and then drive back home late at night and not get a good night's sleep? They could never replicate any of the benefits we provided to these families. Then they tried to say you internalise the burden. That was
only true if people couldn't help out, which we thought they could. Additionally was the issue of emotional support for children. They said parents, adult children, and elderly parents disagree with a parent who's shown abuse. But we think that happens more often when your elderly parents only help babysit once a month and they feel the need to spoil those children more because they never see them frequently. When you're in close proximity and you are always looking after those grandkids, always talking about them with your adult children, you probably can't hide the fact that you might sneak them treats. But also you just tend to try and prioritize raising them the way that you think is best. And given that you see how people do that, we think you raise them well. Finally, about women, we actually think Mitch just spoke about respect matters here, because even if women don't live in labour, caring about elderly people means you're more likely to value the kinds of labour they do. Additionally, women don't stop working. If anything, having elderly people enables younger female adult children to live modern lives.
I thank that speaker for their speech and welcome the third opposition speaker to conclude the substantive portion of the debate.
As we would have liked to reminded their third speaker in a point of information, if we got the chance to put one, the burden that opposition 1 put on them in this debate is about the high burden that they have to prove why physical proximity is necessary on their side of the house. What does it look like to take someone into your home? It means you have to care for them every day. When a parent has an obligation to a child to live in their house, it's because they birthed that child into the world and want to raise them constantly. But living in a home is a high burden. So Prop is an equally high burden to prove that there's a unique moral obligation to take another party into your house and care for them every day. In fact, why is this so different on their side of the house? Because parents can override their kids. They have some authority over their kids. But if they are taking their own parents into their home, they are taking another party into their house that they have to examine their relationship with, which is why opposition's principled analysis in this debate has been about why that reciprocal relationship exists and to what degree proposition has to prove it. So for the first part of this speech, I'm going to examine that principled relationship and explain why proposition has not met their burden through two mechanisms. The first mechanism is our third substantive argument, which received engagement after the 8 minutes were up in Proposition 3's speech. Our third substantive argument showed that taking this burden uniquely places it onto women in families. That is because there is a large societal culture that domestic roles are more often taken upon by women. While we regret this culture, we think that while this culture exists, if Proposition wants to double that burden, it will do absolutely nothing to help people. Why does this answer the material that they give you? Because if this argument is true and it strains relationships, then it means for the child, the adult parents, and the elderly parents, all relationships are uniquely worse because each person feels psychologically that they're part of an unfair intrinsic relationship. Proposition cannot justify putting a higher burden on one of two sexes if they want to engage, if their world exists in that cultural sphere while these problematic social norms exist, then proposition's burden, proposition's principle is uniquely unfair. The second mechanism by which this principled analysis is taken by the opposition is a phrase I'm quite familiar with, which is, it's complicated. There are four mechanisms by which opposition has taken this argument. The first one is difference in location. Why is this exacerbated by proximity uniquely? Let's say the elderly parents want to live in their hometown, but the adult children want to move somewhere else because of their job. Let's say the elderly parents want to live in a different part of the town, but the parents want to live in another part of the town. This is only exacerbated in proximity because now they're all living together as a literal unit, which means conflicts are more likely to arise. That's why parents can justify not wanting proximity to their own parents because they think that these unique disagreements are something that they cannot resolve. The second area would be difference in how to raise kids. This also only occurs in close proximity because if you have a drastically different interpretation or even a reasonably different interpretation from your own parents about how to raise kids, for example, you thought some way that your parents raised you, whether it was the use of like corporal punishment or something like that, was not very good, then you think you don't want your kids to be around that culture. You as a parent have the right to decide that you want space between your grandparents, your parents, and your children. The third area is difference in moral opinion. We think this is significantly more likely than propositions like sort of rosy framing that all of these relationships are like out of love. We think that all relationships are complicated to some degree. We just provided mechanisms for why forcing proximity exacerbates that complicatedness. That's why difference in moral opinion, like religious things, can be exacerbated by close proximity. The fourth area is difference in tense relationships, just disagreements between the parents and the kids, parents that they didn't necessarily disagree with. Those things are also exacerbated. That's why proximity falls uniquely on our side of the house. Before I deal with some of their analysis, I'll take that point.
How can you consistently limit the duty of care to parents to financial support and yet still think that duty exists?
The duty exists, but it doesn't reach the level of taking someone into your house because you are constantly physically living with them. If you were listening to the mechanisms I described, I pointed out specifically why these occur in forcing close physical proximity and why it's your burden to justify that. They tell you that parents will feel neglected. Our material is intrinsic to proximity, but we think the loving relationship between the parents and the kids that are describing, if cooking dinner is the mechanism by which love is expressed, then cooking dinner 20 times versus cooking dinner 5 times is not likely to like exponentially increase the amount of love. If parents and kids already love each other, then there's no reason that level of physical proximity is key, but that level of physical proximity is key for our arguments because it proves a tenser relationship. We're not being extreme. Even in the case between like a homophobic father and their gay son, there's a lot of instances in which these relationships could be bridged. There could be still love and care where both parties care about each other, but the point where close physical proximity has to occur, it's less likely that this is going to be resolved. The second part of my speech I want to touch on is just the utilitarian impacts of these parents that Proposition wants to focus most of this debate on. I think Proposition has claimed conflicting characterizations of this debate in the area of loneliness because they've both said that while parents are separated from their own kids, it is like crushingly lonely, but the second they're in physical proximity, you have a loving relationship that can be solved through dinner. These are conflicting characterizations that I would like to point out, which leads me to separate the rest of my speech into 3 different characterizations that point out the nuances around which this debate occurs. The first characterization is that you live in an old folks home and are separate from your kids. Let's take them at their highest ground that these homes are terrible. Then what type of kids would put their parents there? Ones that are unlikely to care in the first place, or as in Opposition 1 we told you, those kids are likely to have the belief that those parents are a unique burden, or likely to have the belief that they're not adequately going to be able to stay home enough to catch the parents if they fall, which means they feel more safe with literal professionals being around to care for their parents if they were to have a medical mishap. This is the characterization Opposition brings you. Proposition's being a little disingenuous when they're like, 5 people is better than 1 person. Yeah, but that 1 person's like a trained professional, and 3 of those 5 people are like 6-year-old kids. That's the whole point. If kids put people into old folks' homes, it's likely to be safer for them. The second characterization is that parents live away from their children, but are well off and independent and having good lives. That means that they would already have good relationships with their kids. That means that once every couple weeks visit is sufficient to maintain that close relationship, and forcing proximity is not key. Let's talk about the reason why this could be the case. This could be because immigrant children want to live in the United States or some other country that they've immigrated to, but their parents would like to stay in their hometown for religious or cultural reasons. That's why forcing these 2 unique parties that could have very different interests in how they want to live in the same place at the same time can exacerbate tensions in even the best of relationships where parents and kids love each other so much but disagree on this one fundamental thing, which is why forcing proximity or preferring a world with majority proximity doesn't allow that flexibility. But the third characterization is that they live independently, alone, and they're not well off. It is crushingly lonely. This is what Proposition banks most of their analysis on, this characterization. First, that would mean that they don't resolve the issue because living closely to in close proximity would not resolve that crushing loneliness that has already occurred because they're likely to be super far away. So just the logistics of moving them into your own house is not likely to resolve that relationship. But the second thing I want to point out is that the mechanisms they're pointing out for why they would resolve this such a large gap is just like interacting with your kids every day, reading bedtime stories, or just living in proximity or eating dinner together every night. Those things are not likely to resolve the crushing loneliness that they've characterized as the harm on their side of the house, which is why the conflicting characterizations are uniquely harmful for them in this debate. But at the top level in this debate, it is about the principled analysis that I showed you at the top of my speech as to why the burden they place is not justified because of the unique sexism inherent in it and because of the complicatedness of these relationships.
that speaker for their speech and welcome the opposition to reply.
Team New Zealand, I do not hate my grandmother because I know that if she and I live in the same household, our massive moral and religious differences mean that our relationship is going to deteriorate in a way that it never would if we lived separate from each other. The fact that I love her is why I know it's important that we have a degree of separation. That was the difference in this debate. We think it was appalling that they would come up here and say that we hate our loved ones. 2 questions to evaluate this round. What does the world look like when more people feel social pressure to take in their parents? And what is the duty children have to their parents? First question, what does the world look like? 2 benefits came out of the proposition's bent. The first is decreased loneliness of elderly people. We told you a few things which destroyed this argument. We said that you can be lonely in your own child's home as well. If you buy Proposition 1's characterization that these people are working 2 to 3 jobs, then we think it is very lonely when the children go to school, the dad and mom both go to work and don't come home until 10 p.m. and you are still alone. But what don't you have? You don't have a similar community of elderly people with you at all times. You don't have a similar community of nurses who are working with you to make sure you are safe and well. Moreover, we said it was incredibly lonely and isolating to feel as if you're only making your loved ones happy because you give them some marginal utilitarian benefit of cooking for them and giving sweets to their child behind their parents' back. The second benefit they give you is it helps the family. There were 2 stakeholders in this round. Elderly people who are capable of doing so and who are incapable of doing so. If they are capable of doing so, we told you this was non-unique because they could live in the same neighborhood, no, it doesn't have to be 3 hours away, live in the same neighborhood and still pick up the children, do chores around the house and cook dinner. But if they are incapable of helping around, that means every time the child starts crying and they look in the mother's eyes and have to shake their heads saying they can't put them down to bed, they internalize the fact that they've become a burden on the family. Meaning all of proposition harm become magnified in a world in which elderly people cannot actually help. What then is the true comparative? 2 things. First, it places undue burden on women because now they're the ones responsible for taking in the elderly. So it makes things like the wage gap and a lack of promotions even higher because employers are worried about the fact that a woman might have to take off at any given time to take care of their child and to take care of their parents. You weigh this argument in the round because even if they prove there's a moral duty to do so, that cannot outweigh the principle of unfairness that we give you that this burden falls on one stakeholder. But second, we told you, it leads to deteriorating relationship. Proposition replies, best material will be, these are awesome relationships, so they should live together. But we told you that even if they're awesome now, they are likely to deteriorate in the future. More likely, they have amicable relationships from afar that won't happen when they're in close proximity. Moreover, Proposition 3 conceded that grandparents will try to impose their beliefs on children, meaning all of our analysis about how there will be tensions in parenting styles will occur. What then is the duty children have to their parents? At this point, we still don't know why physical proximity is unique to meeting the burden that children have to their parents. The reason that you don't choose to be born is important for this round is because it proves that the duty may exist, but not to the extent of proximity in living in the same home. How then should you weigh this clash? The right to choose how you want to raise and tend a home outweighs all of their principled argumentation because their duty is more than what is necessary. Their duty is supererogatory, in which case we think our principle is more important than even the best case that Proposition Reply might give you in the next 4 minutes. We think we've closed all the doors they might try to open.
I thank that speaker for their speech and welcome the Proposition Reply to conclude this debate.
The reason that it took until third opposition for most of opposition's harms to be substantiated was because they were living in a world where they failed to meet with the reality of what we're seeing. That elderly people are lonely in the situations in the countries that they want to focus on, and only in a world where they are allowed to get that familial connection do they get that support that they so vitally need. And we think we proved pretty clearly right down the line why that was something that was vital in today's debate, but we also helped familial relationships as well, even if they weren't people who loved each other 100%. 3 issues in today's debate. Firstly, about this duty contestation. Secondly, the outcomes for the elderly. And finally, the outcomes for the family. Let's talk about the duty, because we told you there was a duty to reciprocate emotional support on a deep level that you got as a child. They said, well, that's not the case. You didn't choose to be born. But they agreed in response to a point of information that there was a duty to provide financial support because they did that to you. We say that parents provided emotional support as well, and opposition failed to draw why the line was at financial support and not at emotional support. Because except by saying that they're constantly living with them, we would decide that actually that was the only way to get that deeper connection. Then what did they say? Well, they said at second, well, you have a right to control your own home. But firstly, this came out quite late. Secondly, we would say that the duty of care supersedes that, and we did. And thirdly, at best, that is contingent on them being able to prove that it is a better home. At the end of this point, this debate is framed in a world where the most important stakeholder is the elderly, and the side of the house that helps them is the side that wins today's debate. Secondly, let's talk about those outcomes. 2 points here. Firstly, on our non-exclusive benefits, and secondly, about whether there are disagreements. On our non-exclusive benefits, the first thing we told you was about proximity. And third opposition brought new material about how, if you move together, that's problematic because maybe not everyone wants to move. But if that was true, when they move away on their side, that person is necessarily left as alone as we wanted to say, and they were never willing to grapple with. The fact is, you just can't make dinner for your family once a week, as they wanted to characterize, when you live in a rest home. You don't take a bus to the other side of town to help out with dinner. That's never reality that actually occurs. The reality is that you're isolated and never get to see your family and feel like they're letting you down even though they're trying their best. Secondly, on emotional connection, because there was no response to our material about how other connections aren't as fulfilling and can never be enough. Thirdly, about care. because it wasn't just that we told you there was a higher ratio of carers to people who needed support. We also told you how those people were knew more about the person and were more likely to be able to help them. No response to that. So let's talk about how opposition tried to pivot the case on whether there were disagreements. They said there'd be differences in moral opinions and on parenting strategies. We had 5 responses to this down the line. Firstly, we told you how you're likely to understand perspectives now that you're a parent as well. Secondly, that time just heals old wounds. Thirdly, that majority of relationships are probably based on love, and that's a world they had to reckon with. Fourthly, how isolation does nothing to actually solve those issues, so those issues still exist on their side of the house. And fifthly, how we told you at third, how proximity changes people's minds when your grandkids come to you with new ideas and you're willing to change those perspectives. No response to that. If your relationship was as bad as in their worst case, you wouldn't be sending them to a good home anyway. At third opposition, they said, well, you wouldn't do that. But the problem was that was the debate. This was a debate where this is whether you would send them to a home or not. And we also got no response to Mitchell's split material about how we improve attitudes towards elderly. This is a debate about a world where everyone is in this situation. And in most cases, we were able to prove that they were. But let's talk about outcomes for families. So we told you how they can do work, and you don't have to be in a physically amazing shape to be able to help out just a little bit. And that was the failure of opposition, that they didn't grapple with that. They didn't grapple with our material about emotional support that didn't get a response. Their split material about women was entirely contingent on the elderly people being a net detractor from that household. At the point where we proved not only benefits to the household, but also that the most important stakeholder in the vast majority of cases was far better served, we won today's debate.
I thank both teams for this debate. I invite both sides to cross the floor, shake hands whilst the panel reconvenes outside.